Now, if they were going to, and they were selling you something, they wanted money.
A reminder, we're literally about to be live on YouTube. So not that anyone outside the congregation will see it, but just so you know. Okay. Well, there doesn't seem to be anybody joining us so far, but well, we will go ahead and begin. Just so you have your place, we are in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1. We're setting up, and David has just killed Goliath and reintroduced himself to Saul, although we know they knew each other. And now we're gonna see David's ascent to the heights that he will reach. But of course, we'll first start with our blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen, amen. And we're going to, okay, so 18:1. When David finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan's soul became bound up with the soul of David. Jonathan loved David as himself. Kinafsho, like as his own soul. Which is really interesting language. Again, there is this question about the nature of their relationship. I don't know that it's possible for us to know one way or another. I'm not possible for, and that goes in all directions. I don't know if they were lovers. I don't know if they were, secret husbands. I don't know if they were just best friends. I've had close friendships that I could describe this way, that are non-romantic and that are platonic. But obviously, most of the time when you use language like this, it's in a romantic context. So it's not unreasonable to come to such a conclusion.
That's more of a modern day spin on it too.
Yes, certainly.
Friendship between men, and it's not assumed that they're sexual.
Well, then it wouldn't be assumed that they're sexual. I wonder if people reading it today feel the same way about it. I'm not sure. I studied Shakespeare 20 years ago, so no, nobody thought it was then either. But yeah.
Thing that, like, in times where it was, legally or socially unacceptable,
right?
It could fly under the radar as just a really close friendship. So I mean,
sure,
yeah,
and that would be right. That would be an easier way to either present something or to assess something, to witness it, to see it. In times when people are not accepting. So Saul took him into his service, verse 2, that day, and would not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan and David made a pact because Jonathan loved him as himself. It's interesting. Steinsaltz's commentary here says, in light of the great love for Jonathan, for David, and the fact that each fully identified with the other, Jonathan established an eternal, unbreakable covenant with David, as he loved him as his own soul. Okay, Steinsaltz. Sounds. I wish they gave us more information about how this bond was formed. Is all I'm, from a literary perspective, I'm saying. The first thing we see is they're like, boom. They're whatever they are, they're it. They're going. They're together. They're united, and that's wonderful. But like a little bit of build up, a little bit of something to tell us how this happened. Like, part of the reason I say it's so ambiguous is that we don't get any scenes of what it was like when they were meeting and talking and what they were talking about, it's we don't really get that. And without that, it's
I'd like to share a little bit of my personal story, the reason kind of why I'm here.
oh, okay.
Lauren's aware of it. Our son who died was
Mhm.
named Jonathan. And later on, several years after that, I met a really good friend who mentored me and helped me a lot. And his son who died in a car crash was named David. So I thought it was kind of a meant to be sort of thing. And
That's
really,
interesting.
he really guided, I think it was kind of a divine intervention of sorts, extreme coincidence that there are no coincidences really, but he really, that's the reason I'm sitting in this chair here today, I think.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm glad you made that connection.
Rabbi, isn't it true of the Bible though, that it's often laconic and terse? It says something and leads you to fill in between rather than spelling all the details.
Absolutely, absolutely. One sec, I just have to respond to something.
Ironically, Jonathan in Hebrew means the Lord has given. And isn't that extreme irony?
Yes, I mean, yeah.
I didn't know that until afterwards. I didn't know the nature of it, the meaning of the name I picked out. But
Yeah, I know, absolutely. That is the meaning. We'll go to 4. Jonathan took off the cloak and tunic he was wearing and gave them to David, together with his sword, bow, and belt, as a sign of their unity. David went out with the troops, and he was very successful in every mission on which Saul sent him, and Saul put him in command of all the soldiers. This pleased all the troops and Saul's courtiers as well. That's good. David's not only good at one-on-one combat, but has some kind of the guy who can win a one-on-one fight isn't always the best general. Doesn't mean they know tactics or strategy, but David seems that he can do that too. He seems to know that as well. So in fact, he rose. This is like a Joseph level rise, right? This is like, he's like, oh, you were nothing. Oh, now you're the head of all, the second in command of Egypt. It's like, this is like, he was a nobody, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's in charge of the army, and everyone's really happy about it, and everyone respected and admired David. What could go wrong? Now, when the troops came home and David returned from killing the Philistine, the women of all the towns of Israel came out singing and dancing to greet King Saul with hand drums, shouting, and sistrums. The women sang as they danced, and they chanted, Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Yeah. Right. Steinsaltz's the commentary on this, it's really great. It says, this was obviously an exaggeration, which may have stemmed from their desire to flatter the handsome young man whom they must have favored. So, that's the rabbinic perspective on this. It was actually just that these ladies were really into David. It had very little to do with the politics of the kingdom. But Saul is going to take this as not very great. And sure enough, in verse 8, Saul was much distressed and greatly vexed about the matter. For he said, to David they have given tens of thousands, and to me they have given thousands. All that he lacks is the kingship. From that day on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Another way of saying it is he was hostile to David. The next day, an evil spirit of God gripped Saul, and he began to rave in the house while David was playing the lyre, as he did daily. Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, thinking to pin David to the wall, but David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David, for God was with him, and had turned away from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and appointed him chief of 1,000 to march at the head of the troops. David was successful in all his undertakings, for God was with him. And when Saul saw that he was successful, he dreaded him. All Israel and Judah loved David, for he marched at their head. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merav. I will give her to you in marriage. In return, you be my warrior and fight God's battles." Saul thought, "Let not my hand strike him. Let the hand of the Philistines strike him." So this will serve a little bit as teaching foreshadow. but but also, there's a lesson to be learned here that David will learn. It's not a good one, and he probably shouldn't have, but anyway. But also the old I can't be seen. It's really good politicking, actually. He understands politics very well. He says, I can't be seen to hurt this guy. If I hurt him, they all love him. They're going to be really upset. But if he's the heroic soldier who dies in battle, then he's a martyr and also no longer my problem.
David did the same thing with Uriah.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I said. Right. Yeah. Right. Except when David did it, it worked.
Did it?
Well, I mean, his politicking, his thing worked. Whether it was a good idea, it certainly wasn't, but it did work. Okay. So David, yes, 18. David replied to Saul, "Who am I and what is my life, my father's family in Israel, that I should become your majesty's son-in-law?" So, right, he's saying, you're going to marry my oldest daughter. That's a big deal. And so David says, "Who am I? I don't deserve that." But at the time that Merav, daughter of Saul, should have been given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel, the Mecholati. Mecholatite. I don't know how you turn that into an ite, but he's a Mecholati. Adriel HaMecholati. So Yikers changed his mind, married her to somebody else. Now Michal, daughter of Saul, had fallen in love with David. And when this was reported to Saul, he was pleased. It's interesting. Why would he be pleased? He doesn't like David, right? And we know he's good at politics. The reason is that this brings David into the royal family. Think like the modern British royal family, brings him in, but with a more minor member as his spouse. See, the younger daughter is of less ranking value than the older daughter. So, right, it places him lower on the chart, and he's like, okay, good, I can still bring him in. It still makes it look like he and me are the best of, like I benefit from his popularity, like the Royals in the 80s. And then he won't take over because Michal is not even my oldest daughter, and I have Jonathan, and I don't need to, so I'll avoid the whole problem with David this way.
Hadn't Saul promised his daughter to the man who would kill Goliath? Am I remembering?
Right, and he said he would, and then he said, "I'm not gonna." Right, he married her to Adriel. So okay. Verse 21, Saul thought, "I will give her to him, and she can serve as a snare for him, so that the Philistines may kill him." So Saul said to David, "You can become my son-in-law even now through the second one." And Saul instructed his courtiers to say to David privately, "The king is fond of you, and all his courtiers like you. So why not become the king's son-in-law?" When the courtiers repeated those words to David, David replied, "Do you think that becoming the son-in-law of a king is a small matter, when I am but a poor man of no consequence?" Right? I mean, after all, you got to remember that dowries in the ancient world also didn't work the way they do now, right? You paid a bride price. You essentially acquired a wife. Obviously, setting aside the anachronisticness of everything, he's like, I can't give a dowry for a princess. I'm poor. My family comes from nowhere. What do you, right? I can't afford to become the king's son-in-law. I'm not rich like you all. Um, Although one would think with all the battles he was winning, he was getting a little bit of spoil. He couldn't have been broke at this point, but okay, you don't have to be broke to not be able to afford the princess. I got it.
I think it's funny that this is happening like really closely after Saul tried to like nail him with a spear, because now he's like, the king is fond of you.
So it's worth noting that Saul is crazy at this point. So Saul is sometimes normal and sometimes crazy. And so the courtiers we're dealing with that. That's in the background. You should, Bay is right. You should remember that like, even David's like, yeah, no, he's nuts. Sometimes he throws spears, but sometimes he's like kind of cool. It's okay. Like, it's like, he's the king. That's the way it goes. So like, sometimes we just have a crazy king. It's fine. Like, so that's why it's like, but they're like, oh yeah, when the king's not insane, he's really fond of you. Like, that's just when he goes nuts. Sometimes he throws spears, but like, when he's not, he totally thinks you're a great guy. So anyway, so yeah. Verse 24, Saul's courtiers reported to him, this is what David answered. And Saul said, say this to David: the king desires no other bride price than the foreskin of 100 Philistines, as vengeance on the king's enemies, since Saul intended to bring about David's death at the hands of the Philistines. He's like, okay, go get in 100 fights. Maybe one of them will kill. Like, he's really just like, I don't know, maybe one of these guys is going to kill him, and then it won't be my problem anymore. Because he's like, okay, I can bring him into the family, but like, also, if he ended up dead, that would be the optimal. Like, that's top level Saul result. Again, remember, Saul is crazy. David dies. Level 2 result: David marries into the family and becomes nobody. Level 3 result, I don't know. Aliens, probably. He's nuts. He's crazy at this point. He's got like, whatever's wrong with Saul is really wrong with Saul at this point. But it also works politically. This is the part where I say, like, he's crazy, but sometimes he's very with it. And right, exactly. Crazy like a fox. And he's like, the politics he gets, because this works in both ways, because they can go to David and say, look, the king, because the king's a king, he doesn't need your money. What he wants is for you to go be brave, to prove you're worth the princess, because that's good PR for everybody. Everybody likes that. The people will like that. And so David goes, David will hear that and go, well, that does sound like a reasonable thing that somebody might do or say in this time period, without having to say, yeah, and also if you happen to get in 100 fights, you might lose one, which is what he really wants. But like, it works in more than one way, which is why Saul fits very well into the Game of Thronesian politicking. He really can, his politics work to his advantage in multiple different scenarios, even in the midst of all his insanity. How he can keep these plots going while also throwing spears at people, I'm not really sure. But again, he would have been one of the best characters on Game of Thrones, but we didn't get that, unfortunately.
He's like a Hamlet situation almost. Like,
oh yeah,
like
like
he's got all these really clever plots and stuff going on, but he's also kind of losing it. So
right. And his losing it will eventually cause them to not like, at some point there's going to be
to fall on his own spirit.
right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. One wonders where Shakespeare got the idea. Anyway, so verse 26, when his courtiers told this to David, David was pleased with the idea of becoming the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David went out with his men and killed 200 Philistines. David brought their foreskins and they were counted out for the king. 1 foreskin, 2 foreskin, 3 foreskin. That he might become the king's son-in-law. Saul then gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. So David did it. He didn't die. He comes back. He says, 1 foreskin, 2. Saul goes, okay, but you did it. Now we got our PR victory. You're still marrying the second daughter. My son likes you for some reason. Fine, let's go for it. So it works out here and they get married.
I'm struck by the psychological coarseness of this. He doesn't say, bring me the arms or bring me the head of 100 foreskins. Bring me the foreskins.
I mean, we all have arms, right?
Okay.
I'm sorry, if you're comparing the army of Israel and the army of every other nation on earth, is there any one thing that differentiates the army of Israel from all the other nations on earth? Well, you couldn't take one from a Jewish guy. But you could take them from them. Am I saying it's nice? No, it's super. I mean, like, obviously no one should conduct warfare in the 21st century this way, and nobody does, I hope. But like, I'm just saying that, like, this is a barbaric time. It's not, you needed proof. I mean, I think it's better and, quite frankly, much more space efficient than bringing their heads, or God forbid, like in just 200 years ago, less than that, scalps, in Civil War bounties and stuff. Like, don't, so we've all been way grosser, way more recently. This is not like the craziest thing that anyone's ever written on the page. Yeah.
You made the equation that I was searching for too. I was trying to connect it to circumcision and the right. And it's that these prove they're not Jewish.
Right. Not that he would do that, but like, it's an easy thing for them where it's like, and obviously there's a built-in anti-treason system, which is you couldn't possibly get these from one of our people. Like a loyalist of Saul, you couldn't kill one and say, this is his, because that wouldn't make any sense.
Might quibble with you about how times not as barbaric today as they were in the past.
You're right. There are very barbaric people today, but
decorum,
not everyone is, and we're doing better as
the
a.
decorum with which we interact with others, the decline of morals and the baseness and the coarseness of our society.
Well,
Erosion.
because like I don't think that necessarily casuality can't possibly be a word, right? I don't think things becoming more casual and less formal necessarily means all of that. I guess I disagree that I don't necessarily think people are they may be less cordial, but they may not be, they might be less rude too. So
I don't
I'm
know about that.
I'm just saying it might be true. Depends who, where, there's a lot of depends on that, but it's too big for me to say that, yeah, that we're all going to hell in a handbasket.
I think every generation throughout all of history
Yeah.
has been like, we're in a state of totally unforeseen moral decline. And I
Right,
don't
yeah.
think that we're unique.
And I think as we grow, we tend to change and firm up our feelings on moral issues, and that also makes us feel that people who are still developing their feel around moral issues are unformed and debased and
Perhaps it's the
whatnot.
media that contributes, but I don't recall road rage where people getting guns out when I was 18 years old.
I don't remember people having guns in their cars all that often when I was
that's
younger.
not-
But I do remember road rage when I was a kid. So
Yeah, but not
maybe the 90s were weird, but I remember road rage. We definitely had it. I learned it in the crib. I'm a DC driver. Everyone in Washington, DC has road rage. It's a problem. Sorry, internet. I guess this is going out to the whole internet. Great. Okay. Verse 28. So when Saul realized that God was with David and that Michal, daughter of Saul, loved David, it's not that weird in Hebrew because her name is Michal bat Shaul. That's her full name. So that's why it says it in the translation. Saul grew more afraid of David, and Saul was David's enemy ever after. right? So if you're, I mean, you could just think of Game of Thrones, honestly, if you wanted to. If you married this daughter and then she was like, actually, I love this guy. I'm with him. My loyalty is to this person, not to you, King Saul. That's a problem politically. Because now you thought you were bringing him into a thing, but now his thing is growing. His force within your family is growing.
Yeah, it kind of feels like
He has Jonathan and Michal now, and now it seems like David is might control the family. And
the courtiers.
yeah, courtiers are, they're courtiers. They're easily replaceable when a new administration comes in. Yeah. I mean, yes, if they smell a change, they'll definitely go with the change, for sure. Which is what Saul is afraid of. And he tried to bring David in and marginalize him, but it turns out David might be taking over. And now Saul's really upset. In verse 30, the Philistine chiefs marched out to battle. And every time they marched out, David was more successful than all the other officers of Saul, and his reputation soared. And Saul just very resentful. A lot of resentment.
It's quite a contrast between Pharaoh and Joseph. Pharaoh sees his value and install, after he rises, he didn't appear to be.
But Pharaoh had nothing to fear from Joseph because the people hated the Jews, the Hebrews, whatever, so much they wouldn't even eat with them. The idea that Joseph would be, they had to give him an Egyptian name and wife just to make him palatable to the people. The idea that they were going to make him the Pharaoh, it just wasn't going to happen.
Joseph didn't ask to be the Pharaoh either.
Well, yeah, also Joseph had no designs on that job, but there's no clear clue at this time that David has any designs on that job. Beyond what he's told by the I mean, obviously there's that, but like, I don't want to make that nothing, but like David's also living in a realpolitik world as well as it's weird because we have these two worlds going on simultaneously now with a kingship. We have the world of realpolitik in Jewish national politics, and we have the theological world, which right now we're not hearing that much about, but with the prophets will come back in and be like, okay, let's talk about what's going on. Yeah.
This is also, I think, a psychological struggle of every leader, a teacher, a father. Do you hope that your son and your student is going to grow and surpass you? And do you take pride in that?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you become paranoid and suspicious and have to demean him?
Right, yeah. Sure. But one might also argue monarchy really isn't the kind of system where we're just supporting anybody who can get to their best they can be. It's not really the system. Monarchy, that's not really monarchy. Even constitution, I think if you ask the current monarchs in the world with no power, the Spain, the England, the whatever, and said, hey, do you think it'd be great if you just encourage everyone to be the best they can? And they're like, no, there are rules and a system, and what are you talking about? It's just not how monarchy works. So like, yeah, but yes, theoretically, yes, we want people that we teach or that work under us to grow and advance and become the best they can be, perhaps even better than us. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so chapter 19. Bad stuff time. Saul urged his son Jonathan and all his courtiers to kill David, but Saul's son Jonathan was very fond of David. And Jonathan told David, my father Saul is bent on killing you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Get to a secret place and remain in hiding. I will go out and stand next to my father in the field where you will be, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I will tell you. So it's no secret whose side Jonathan's on, at least not to us, maybe to Saul. So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul. He said to him, let not your majesty wrong his servant David, for he has not wronged you. Indeed, all his actions have been very much to your advantage. It's funny because he says his actions, and the commentary is in war and in playing music. Literally, since you've known him, first with music, then with war, all he's done is do things that are good for you. And he's never hurt you once. So why do you want to kill him? Doesn't make a lot of sense to anybody, really.
Oh, jealousy, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's irrational for sure. Jealousy is irrational, and he's being irrational. And Jonathan goes to him and tries to provide a rational argument, being like, look, this guy he's one of your top soldiers. You're really going to kill this guy for nothing? At least Uriah was just like, okay, yeah, he's like, okay, but like, you know, it's not like the best soldier.
Well, human.
Because he's really like shooting himself in the foot here. That's what Jonathan's like, man, you're the king. You're going to give up the chance to win wars and that's like the only thing kings do. And you're going to give up the chance to win wars because you don't like him? It doesn't make sense, right?
It's very quickly in our profession that one can't ration with a paranoid and talk
Well,
about it.
Exactly.
It's a paranoid
Exactly. Not that Saul is paranoid. Also, it's worth noting, of all Saul's craziness, being worried that someone is going to take his throne isn't crazy.
Yeah.
Because although he doesn't really believe in all the religion stuff a ton, the prophet did already tell him that he was going to lose it. So it's not really while other things might be paranoid, it's not paranoid to think somebody's going to take it. Because he wasn't told who, but he was told that he was going to lose it. So
My opinion, Stalin was a perfect modern day example. He purged the Red Army in 1937.
sorry, I heard the word Stalin was a perfect example, and I just couldn't imagine what the next words out of your mouth were going to be. Yeah, paranoia. You're right, actually. Yes,
That's in
the doctors and the army, and
That's
yeah.
why his second wife committed suicide, because she killed
And it's why he died, because there were no doctors to treat him, because he
Right.
killed
He
all.
purged.
That might be apocryphal. I don't know, but who knows? He killed a lot of people, so it's not hard to believe. Okay, so verse 5. He, David, took his life in his hands and killed the Philistine. Of course, we're talking here about Goliath, or Goliath, I guess. And God wrought a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and rejoiced. Why then should you incur the guilt of shedding an innocent's blood, killing David without cause? Saul heeded Jonathan's plea, and Saul swore, as God lives, he shall not be put to death. Jonathan called David, and Jonathan told him all this. Then Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as before. So Saul is talked out of it for the moment. He says, you know what? Okay. There are more battles to be fought. There will be more battles with the Philistines to be fought. He hasn't beaten them yet. And I need this guy. It's an immediate need, right? He's taking a practical course. So verse 8, and fighting broke out again. David went out and fought the Philistines. He inflicted a great defeat upon them, and they fled before him. Then an evil spirit of God came upon Saul while he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. Are we still? It's the same thing over again. This is fun. This is really great. People got to stop throwing things at David. Saul's got to stop doing it. Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul so that he drove the spear into the wall. David fled and got away. That night, Saul sent messengers to David's home to keep watch on him and to kill him in the morning. But David's wife Michal told him, unless you run for your life tonight, you will be killed tomorrow. Michal let David down from the window, and he escaped and fled. This is not very good house arrest. Michal then took the oracle idol, Teraphim. Yeah, it's like a family idol. Well, that's deeply upsetting. Hold on, I need to go back to my commentaries. So it's a figurine in the shape of a person, which is the important thing here. She laid it on the bed and covered it with a cloth. And at its head, she put a net of goat's hair. Right? This is literally the origin of every sitcom thing where they put something in the bed and try and convince the parents that they're actually still sick in bed during the day, but actually have gone out to Bueller or whatever. Yeah. To play hooky or whatever. It originated here in the Bible. So just remember that, I guess. Saul sent messengers to seize David, but she said, he's sick. See, this is him. He's sick in bed. Saul, however, sent back the messengers to see David for themselves. Bring him up to me in the bed, he ordered, that he may be put to death. Which is funny that it worked on the soldiers the first time. And she was like, oh, yeah, he's really sick. He's in there. He's sick. And they went back. They said, oh, he's really sick. We can't see him. And Saul's like, really? Did you see him? It's just great writing. It's just terrific. When the messengers came, they found the oracle idol in the bed with the net of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, why did you play that trick on me and let my enemy get away safely? Because, Michal answered Saul, he said to me, help me get away or I'll kill you, which is not what happened.
Gets to blame David.
Right, but this lets her, it's funny, you could see it as her playing both sides. I see it as her she's working for David. This is how she spies her way in to do espionage on the king and his activities by being like, oh, I'm on your side, daddy, but this guy threatened to kill me if I didn't help him get out of the house. Right. She stays in his good graces. He thinks she's still on his team. It's very, very helpful. So David made good his escape. And he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. He and Samuel went and stayed at Nayot, I guess. Let me see where the Hebrew is. Nayot, yeah, okay. Saul was told that David was at Nayot in Ramah, and Saul sent messengers to seize David. They saw a band of prophets speaking in ecstasy, with Samuel standing by as their leader. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul's messengers, and they too began to speak in ecstasy. So they're prophesying. They're swept up in the spirit of prophecy. When Saul was told about this, he sent other messengers, but they too spoke. Saul sent a third group, and that happened again. All of them swept up in this prophetic experience. So he himself went to Ramah. When he came to the great cistern at Siku, he asked, where are Samuel and David? And was told that they were at Nayot in Ramah. He was on his way there to Nayot in Ramah when the Spirit of God came upon him too. He walked on, speaking in ecstasy, until he reached Nayot in Ramah. Then he too stripped off his clothes, and he too spoke in ecstasy before Samuel. And he lay naked all that day and all night. That is why people say, is Saul too among the prophets? Which was, remember back at the beginning of Saul's story, he was with this group, he was walking into town with this group of these prophets, and they said, is Saul among the prophets? Because he's like a big workaday guy, not a philosophy guy. Anyway, so now they get to tell a joke about Saul, essentially. This is all just, Saul is right. They say this phrase, which had been stated before in astonishment, now became a common aphorism. Very strange. But it works because David gets away.
Speaking, actually brings to mind to me the, New Testament, let's talk about, speaking in tongues.
Yeah. This, I don't know if it's related to this. I don't know if it's the same phenomena. I don't know if it's supposed to describe the same phenomena.
Think so. This is very specific about what speaking in tongues is.
Okay. Yeah. This is like it's like if badly directed prophetic energy was hitting you. And so you weren't like doing prophecy. You're not like saying what's going to happen, but you're like thrown into this mindset of not being able to understand the present from the future. And that makes you go a little nutso. And that's basically what they're talking about here. In other words, like they're on drugs, LSD or something.
I think what the New Testament interpretation would be more like speaking in tongues.
Oh, just that it like specifically talks about like tongues of fire and the Holy Spirit and things like that. And this only ever says like speaking in ecstasy or like the Spirit of God. So like, I don't think the New Testament ever describes it as in the way that this is described.
Sure. And then I'm not sure if the New Testament is that big on new prophecy. I mean, post the prophet, post the apostolic era. Okay, so chapter 20. David fled from Naioth and Ramah. He came to Jonathan and said, "What have I done? What is my crime and my guilt against your father that he seeks my life?" He replied, "Heaven forbid, you shall not die. My father does not do anything great or small without disclosing it to me. Why should my father conceal this matter from me? It cannot be." Right? So what does this indicate? Just from a political, again, we're having our little Game of Thrones morning. It might indicate that Jonathan has lost Saul's trust. That Saul knows Jonathan is more on Team David than he is on Team Saul. And so the whole, "oh, I won't kill him," it's a ruse. Because he didn't trust Jonathan. He told him what he wanted to hear, not what he was really going to do. And so he's like, "Oh, it can't be that I didn't know about it." Verse 3, David swore further, "Your father knows well that you are fond of me and has decided. Jonathan must not learn of this or he will be grieved. But as God lives and as you live, there is only a step between me and death." Right? So he's saying, even if we're going to say he trusts you in everything else, he clearly doesn't trust you in this.
Still like casting like a sympathetic Saul here. Like he's saying that the reason he didn't tell you is because he knew you'd be upset by it, not because like he doesn't trust you or whatever.
Well, but when you take that line and you think about it, that could also mean what he's saying is Jonathan must not learn of this or he will be grieved and will use that grief to stop my plans. He doesn't want Jonathan to intervene. Or worse, he may have to kill his own crown prince. I mean, that is not what he wants. So yes, but also it could be, but it could also be he'll be sad and will stop me or will try and stop me. And either I'll die or he'll die. And that's not what anybody, except for maybe David, would benefit from. So Jonathan said to David, verse 4, "Whatever you want, I will do it for you." David said to Jonathan, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and I am to sit with the king at the meal. Instead, let me go and I will hide in the countryside until the third evening. If your father notes my absence, you say, 'David asked my permission to run down to his hometown, Beit Lechem, for the whole family has its annual sacrifice there.' If he says, 'Good, your servant is safe.' But if his anger flares up, know that he is resolved to do me harm." Right? This verse 8, and then we'll deal faithfully with your servant, since you have taken your servant into a covenant of God with you. And if I am guilty, kill me yourself, but don't make me go back to your father. Right? He's like, "Look, if I've done something and it's so bad that whatever bond we have is broken, I'd rather you just killed me than have me experience the pain and the shame of your betrayal when you bring me in front of your father and cut my throat. Again, nobody's really sure who they can trust. And it's so bad at this point, David's not even 100% sure he can trust Jonathan. But he says, I don't really have another choice. You're all I've got. So just kill me if you're going to do it. But if you're not, here's the plan. And of course, it's a decent plan because it'll reveal Saul's intentions, which Saul is trying to hide from Jonathan. Yeah, I really, you could write this up as a series. It would be great. I would watch it.
You're referring to Game of Thrones.
But just, you don't have to call it anything related. Just write a political intrigue about David, Saul, Jonathan, Michal, Merav, like the whole group. There's enough characters. Write it and just pretend they're other people. Honestly, if you do that like George R.R. Martin did, you could make a whole bunch of money. Just write something new and change all the names. People have been doing that for centuries. We just talked about Shakespeare. The Bible's real easy to rip off. Nobody seems to care. That's why it's the greatest story ever told, right?
They don't sue you.
Oh, you'll get your theodicy. Divine judgment shall come for you. Just that kind of copyright court only comes in the afterlife. Yeah, that's not one you want to break. Okay. Okay, so we're moving so verse 9. Jonathan replied, "Don't talk like that. If I learn that my father has resolved to kill you, I will surely tell you about it." Jonathan's hurt, right? He's a little hurt that David doesn't entirely trust him. David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" Jonathan said to David, "Let us go into the open." And they both went out into the open, so that nobody would hear them. They're away from everything now. Then Jonathan said to David, "By the eternal, the God of Israel, I will sound out my father at this time tomorrow or on the third day. And if his response is favorable for David, I will send a message to you at once and disclose it to you. But if my father intends to do you harm, may God do thus to Jonathan and more if I do not disclose it to you and send you off to escape unharmed. May God be with you, as God was formerly with my father." And that line is good because that builds trust, right? Again, he's making it very clear his allegiances. He's like, I want to be extra clear with you. God isn't with my dad, he's with you. And this is how we'll communicate so you'll be able to do stuff. Verse 14, "Nor shall you fail to show me God's faithfulness while I am alive, nor when I am dead shall you ever discontinue your faithfulness to my house. Not even after God has wiped out every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. Thus has Jonathan covenanted with the house of David, and may God requite the enemies of David." And it's interesting. It's interesting because what Jonathan here is essentially saying, and the commentaries help with this, isn't like, I'm going to be king and you're going to be loyal to me. You could read it that way, right? Especially when you're doing, like, they're like, haha, our houses will be loyal and you'll be my general and I'll be the king and my dad sucks. Let's get rid of him. You could see it that way. Like, that's a perfectly legitimate political way to see it, I think. You could also read it as, when you take over or whatever happens, my dad's going to be gone. Whatever happens, let our houses be united in friendship and whatever forever, which is a nicer way to read it in a less political way. Right. And 17, Jonathan, out of his love for David, adjured him again, swore to him again, for he loved him as himself. Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow will be the new moon, and you will be missed when your seat remains vacant. So the day after tomorrow, go down all the way to the place where you hid the other time, and stay close to the Ezel stone. Now I will shoot 3 arrows to one side of it, as though I were shooting at a mark. And I will order the boy to go and find the arrows. If I call to the boy, hey, the arrows are on this side of you, be reassured and come, for you are safe and there is no danger, as God lives. But if instead I call to the lad, hey, the arrows are beyond you, then leave, for God has sent you away. As for the promise we made to each other, may God be witness between you and me forever. Since, it's possible they won't ever see each other again, if all this doesn't go according to plan. David hid in the field. The new moon came, and the king sat down to partake of the meal. When the king took his usual place on the seat by the wall, Jonathan rose, and Avner sat down at Saul's side, but David's place remained vacant. That day, however, Saul said nothing. It's accidental, he thought. He must be impure and not yet purified, right? He must not have gone to mikveh yet, so he can't sit down to the meal. But on the day after the new moon, the second day, David's place was vacant again. So Saul said to his son Jonathan, why didn't the son of Jesse come to the meal yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David begged leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, please let me go, for we are going to have a family feast in our town, and my brother has summoned me to it. Do me a favor, let me slip away to see my kin. That is why he has not come to the king's table. In other words, him not being here isn't a slight on your honor. You can't use this as an excuse. I gave him permission. He asked and I gave it. Saul flew into a rage against Jonathan. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, he shouted. I know that you side with the son of Yishai, to your shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. Weird. For as long as the son of Yishai lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Now then, have him brought to me, for he is marked for death. So he's not lying to Jonathan anymore. He's telling him the truth. He says, look, this comes down to you, your future, right? He's not making it about him. He doesn't want it to seem like it's about him. He's saying your future, yourself and your kingship aren't secure as long as David lives. But, verse 32, Jonathan spoke up and said to his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? At that, Saul threw his spear at him to strike him down, and Jonathan realized that his father was determined to do away with David.
Red flag laws in those days.
Saul, the commentaries say it was an expression of anger, but Saul wasn't trying to kill Jonathan. Like he threw it, but didn't throw it like at him. He threw it in his direction because he wasn't really trying to kill. He wasn't trying to kill Jonathan. Right. Right. Everyone was at this festive meal. All the top officers, all the top generals, they were all at all the courtiers. They were all there, so they would have all seen and heard this. This is war, inner war, not real war, because technically it's just effectively this meal declares David a rebel against the crowd. Verse 34, Jonathan rose from the table in a rage. He wouldn't be the son of Saul if he didn't have some rage in him. He ate no food on the second day because of the new moon, because he was grieved about David, and because his father had humiliated him. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the open for the meeting with David, accompanied by a young boy. He said to the boy, run ahead and find the arrows that I shoot. And as the boy ran, he shot the arrows past him. When the boy came to the place where the arrows shot by Jonathan had fallen, Jonathan called out to the boy, hey, the arrows are beyond you. And Jonathan called after the boy, quick, hurry up, don't stop. So Jonathan's boy gathered the arrows and came back to his master. The boy suspected nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan handed the gear to his boy and told him, take these back to the town. When the boy got there, David emerged from his concealment at the Negev. He flung himself face down on the ground and bowed low 3 times. They kissed each other and wept together. David wept the longer. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we two have sworn to each other in the name of God. May God be witness between you and me, and between your offspring and mine forever." Now they're pretty sure they're not going to meet again. And that's sad.
Gain a great sense of Jonathan's faith in God too. God has abandoned father.
Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly faith there. A lot of these people are they believe. They, hem ma'amim be'emunah shlema, right? They believe with total and complete faith. But it's a very interesting story. I'm not sure. Does anyone have any comments they want to make? Especially wrapping up David and Jonathan.
These are metaphorical message, I think, too. Do what's right, rather than just what your familial bonds are and what tradition is.
It's an interesting question, though. How do we know it's what's right? Is Jonathan doing? Here's another question. Is Jonathan doing it? He could be. I'm not saying he's not. Is Jonathan doing it because he's doing what he thinks is right? Or is he doing it because it's a matter of loyalties? And his love and loyalty ultimately lie with David and not with Saul. What?
Or both.
I mean, could it be both? Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, it could be many things. I'm looking for the dominant thing right now, and yeah, I'm not sure. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure how much of it is we believe in God and God has removed his favor from Saul, so we're against Saul, because they weren't against Saul until Saul was against David. Neither of them were. So was it that? I guess it could be, but it wouldn't make sense because their previous as zealots, because their previous actions don't align with that. They don't do that. So now they're against Saul, but really it seems to be because Saul is trying to kill David. If Saul really had stopped trying to kill David, David went back to him after the last time, which happens a lot in these stories because David's kids, this happens once or twice where before they finally have it out, where there's fights. But yeah. Yeah.
Like it really seems like everyone in Saul's life was trying to make this work, and Saul was just like determined to like ruin every relationship he had. Like it really seems like he's the architect of his own destruction.
Yes. And this story truly gives the best and maybe initial meaning to the term self-fulfilling prophecy. In that he was told the prophecy, and then it's Oedipus Rex completely. He was told the prophecy, and being told the prophecy caused him to force himself to fulfill it. If he had not been nuts, if he hadn't tried to kill David, maybe none of it, maybe it would have, because maybe it would have just happened a different way. Who's to say? But his actions are certainly blamable in this situation for all of what's about to happen to him. Him being Saul. If his politicking and all that was the reason he was going to lose the kingship, is what the prophet said. The funny thing is, that's kind of how prophets work. The time of what they say doesn't have to be the time in which it happens. So was it Saul's previous politicking that lost him the kingship? Or would it be the politicking that Saul would do after he was told the prophecy that the prophet knew he would do, the reason he lost the kingship?
Part of his style, and it just continued.
He was good at it. But it took the place of all of the things a king was supposed to do for God. Instead, it became Game of Thrones. This book was about God like 2 chapters ago. Now it's about who can we kill and how fast can we find and kill them. That's not good. And you get that sense as you go through it. You go, oh, this Saul kingship feels really dirty and slimy and not good.
I might say the prophet told him he lost the kingship because he didn't honor God in the first place. What follows proves that the prophecy was correct.
Sure.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea though, just personally, that it's like, well, you're going to keep doing bad. And that's why, like, what you've done up to now may not have justified the punishment, but what you will do in totality will justify the punishment. Because what he had done up to that point, you could argue was not enough to be, for the kingship to be taken from his family. But what he will end up doing, you go, this can't, none of these, get all these people out of here. This is not good. We made a mistake. This is a problem. They're all kind of nuts. Michal, Jonathan, Saul, they're all kind of nutso. So let's, move on to a new king and a new era of stability for our empire.
And then in this area, he doesn't even listen to God.
Nope, you're right. Yes.
He didn't
Yeah.
consult prophets.
They weren't at his court. Why weren't they at the big dinner? The big festival of the new moon dinner.
No.
They would be for other kings,
Mm.
but not for Saul. Future kings, better kings. But you're right. Absolutely. Saul just stopped trying to hear it. After he was told by the prophet, we're done, he said, I'm done with all this. I'm the king. I got an army. I don't need to think about God again.
A lesson for all of us.
Exactly. So Saul went ahead with his life and kingship, and we will see the result. In 2 weeks, we will see the result. Thank you all for joining me this morning. I'm very happy to have had everyone, and anyone who watches it later on YouTube. Thank you for joining.